Welcome to Curious Nightmares, the channel where your fears and deepest curiosities collide. Prepare for spine-tingling tales and eerie explorations into the supernatural. Subscribe and stay tuned for hair-raising stories.
True horror. My first and only train ride. I never thought my first train ride would be my last. I'm a simple girl, born and raised in a sleepy town where the most exciting event was the annual fall fair. My life until now was unremarkable, filled with mundane routines and the same familiar faces. But that was before the letter arrived, the one that changed everything. My grandmother, whom I never knew, had passed away, leaving me her estate in a town I'd never heard of. The news was surprising, to say the least. I didn't even know I had a grandmother. My parents had always been tight-lipped about their past, and now, with them gone, I was left with more questions than answers. The lawyer's letter mentioned a train ticket already arranged for me to attend the reading of the will. So there I was, standing on a nearly deserted platform, waiting for the 11:45 p.m. train to somewhere unknown. The night air was crisp and a faint mist rolled in, blurring the edges of the dimly lit platform. The old station, with its peeling paint and creaky signboards, added to the eerie atmosphere. There was a sense of timelessness about it, as if the modern world had forgotten this place. The train's arrival broke the silence, its horn a long, mournful wail that sent shivers down my spine. It was an old steam train, like something out of a black and white movie. The hiss of steam and the clatter of wheels on tracks seemed unusually loud in the quiet of the night. I boarded hesitantly, finding the carriage surprisingly modern compared to the train's exterior. It was almost empty, save for a few scattered passengers who seemed as disinterested in me as they were in their own journeys. As the train lurched forward, I settled into my seat, the rhythmic chugging of the engine a soothing background noise. I tried to read a book I had brought along but found it hard to concentrate. My thoughts kept drifting to my unknown grandmother and the mysterious inheritance. Hours passed, and the gentle sway of the train had a hypnotic effect. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, the carriage was shrouded in darkness. The train had stopped. Panicked, I looked around. The few passengers who had been there before were gone. I was alone. A cold wind blew through the carriage, and I wrapped my coat tighter around me. I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was a routine stop, or perhaps there was a problem with the train. But deep down, I felt something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I decided to explore the train, hoping to find someone, a conductor, a passenger, anyone. As I moved through the carriages, an uneasy feeling grew within me. Each carriage was empty, the seats untouched, as if no one had been there for years. Then in the distance I heard it, a faint, haunting melody, like a music box playing in reverse. It was coming from the last carriage. My heart raced, but curiosity propelled me forward. As I opened the door, a chill ran through me. The last carriage was unlike the others. It was older, the wood panels warped, the seats torn and stained. The music box melody was louder now, coming from the far end of the carriage. There was something mesmerizing about it, drawing me in despite my fear. I walked down the aisle, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the confined space. The melody was coming from a small, intricately carved music box sitting on a seat. It was playing by itself, the haunting tune filling the carriage with an ethereal presence. As I reached out to close the lid, the train jolted violently, throwing me to the ground. The lights flickered, then went out, plunging me into darkness. The melody stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. Panic set in as I scrambled to my feet. I needed to find a way out, to escape this nightmare. I fumbled in the darkness, trying to make my way back to the door. But something was different. The carriage seemed to stretch endlessly, my hands finding no end to the seats and walls. Then, a whisper, barely audible, drifted through the darkness. "Help me," it said. A voice filled with such sorrow and pain that it froze me in place. I wasn't alone. The whispers grew, multiple voices intertwining, each crying out in despair. I felt hands, cold and insubstantial, brushing against me, tugging at my clothes. The darkness felt alive, teeming with unseen presences. I ran, tripping over unseen obstacles, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers followed, growing into anguished screams that echoed in the void. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, I saw a light, a faint glimmer in the distance. I pushed towards it, my last hope of escape. As I neared, the light grew brighter, revealing a door at the end of the carriage. I burst through, finding myself back in the modern part of the train. The lights were on, and the familiar rumble of the train on tracks returned. I collapsed, gasping for air, my heart pounding. But relief was short-lived. The train was still empty, the carriages deserted. I was alone, but the feeling of being watched, of not being truly alone, lingered. I made my way to the front of the train, searching for the driver's cabin. But with each step, the train seemed to change, the walls becoming more decrepit, the air colder. When I finally found the cabin, the door was ajar. I pushed it open, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. The driver's cabin was old, covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. The controls were rusted and frozen in place, and in the driver's seat, a skeletal figure sat, its bony hands still gripping the wheel. A scream escaped my lips as the realization hit me. This train was a ghost train, lost in time, its passengers and driver long gone. I backed away, my mind racing. How could I escape this nightmare? Would I be trapped on this train forever, just another whisper in the dark? Then, the train started to slow, the screech of brakes echoing through the carriages. I looked out the window, seeing a station approaching. It was my stop, the destination of my ill-fated journey. As the train came to a halt, I hesitated. Should I get off? What would I find outside? Was this a chance for escape, or just another trap? With a deep breath, I decided to take my chances. I stepped off the train, onto a platform that was shrouded in mist, the station sign unreadable. The train hissed one last time before disappearing into the fog, leaving me alone on the platform. I looked around, the sense of dread growing. The station was deserted, the buildings dilapidated and overgrown. It was like stepping into a forgotten world, a place lost in time. And then I heard it again, the faint melody of a music box drifting through the mist. A chill ran down my spine as I realized my journey was far from over. The melody was a siren call, drawing me deeper into the forsaken station. I moved forward, each step heavy with dread. The mist swirled around me, obscuring my vision, creating ghostly shapes in the air. My mind raced with thoughts of phantoms and lost souls, but I couldn't resist the haunting tune that seemed to echo my own heartbeat. As I wandered through the abandoned station, I came across an old, cracked mirror hanging on a wall. The reflection was distorted, but in it, I saw figures moving behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty, mist-covered platform. When I looked back at the mirror, the figures were gone. My heart pounded in my chest, fear gripping me like a vice. I continued on, the music box melody leading me to an old waiting room. The room was filled with shadows, the remnants of furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. In the center, on a decaying bench, sat the music box, its melody growing louder, more insistent. As I approached, the music box lid slammed shut, and the room plunged into silence. Then, the whispers started, just like on the train, but this time, they were all around me, surrounding me. They were voices of the past, each one telling a tale of sorrow and despair. The shadows in the room began to move, coalescing into forms, ghostly apparitions of people, their faces twisted in anguish. They reached out to me, their hands passing through me, leaving a trail of icy coldness. Their eyes, hollow and empty, seemed to plead for release, for an end to their eternal suffering. I backed away, my mind racing for a way out. That's when I saw it, a flickering light in the distance, beyond the station. A lighthouse. It stood tall and solitary, a beacon in the unending darkness. Driven by a desperate hope, I ran towards it, the whispers and wails of the ghosts following me. The ground beneath my feet was treacherous, overgrown with weeds and littered with debris. But I didn't stop. As I neared the lighthouse, the ground gave way beneath me. I fell, tumbling into darkness, a sense of weightlessness enveloping me. I braced for impact, but instead I landed softly on something cold and damp. I was in a tunnel, the walls lined with old bricks, moisture dripping from the ceiling. A faint light glowed in the distance, and I stumbled towards it, my hands scraping against the rough surface as I navigated the narrow space. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, an underground lake at its center. The water was still and black, like a mirror reflecting the darkness, and there on the other side of the lake was the lighthouse, its light pulsing rhythmically. I heard a splash behind me and turned to see ripples spreading across the lake. Something was in the water, something large and unseen. I could hear its movement, a slow, deliberate glide through the depths. I looked for a way around, but the edges of the lake were steep and unclimbable. The only way to the lighthouse was through the water. With a deep breath, I stepped into the lake. The water was ice cold, numbing my legs as I waded deeper. The thing in the water moved closer, circling me, its presence felt but unseen. Halfway across, I felt something brush against my leg, a slimy, writhing touch that made me scream. I moved faster, my heart pounding, my breath coming in gasps. As I neared the other side, the thing in the water surged forward, creating a wave that knocked me off my feet. I fought to the surface, gasping for air, my arms flailing in the dark water. Then suddenly I was out, crawling onto the shore, soaked and trembling. I looked back at the lake, but there was nothing there, just the still black water. I stood up, my eyes fixed on the lighthouse. It was so close now. As I continued to climb the lighthouse stairs, the eerie silence was broken only by my own footsteps. Reaching the top, I found myself in a circular room with windows overlooking the sea. The room was bare, save for a large, antique-looking telescope pointed towards the train station I had just left. Curiosity overcame my fear, and I peered through the telescope. The view was crystal clear, as if the distance had melted away. I could see the train station, the deserted platform, and then, to my astonishment, the train itself. But it was different now. It looked old and decrepit, its once sleek carriages rusted and covered in vines, as if it had been abandoned for decades. Confused, I turned from the telescope and noticed something else in the room, a dusty journal on a small wooden desk. The cover was old leather, worn and cracked. I opened it, and the pages revealed a story that sent a chill down my spine. The journal belonged to a lighthouse keeper from many years ago, a woman who wrote of a cursed train that appeared every full moon. She spoke of lost souls, passengers trapped in a perpetual loop of horror, forever riding the train, never able to leave. As I read on, a particular entry caught my eye. The keeper had written about a young woman who boarded the train, much like myself. She was the only one who ever returned, but she was changed, haunted, speaking of unspeakable horrors she'd witnessed. The keeper believed this woman held the key to breaking the curse, but before she could act, the woman disappeared, never to be seen again. I closed the journal, my mind racing. Was I like that woman? Was this some sort of twisted fate, a cycle repeating itself? I had to know more. Suddenly, the room shook violently and I stumbled, barely keeping my balance. The lighthouse seemed to be reacting to the journal, or perhaps to my presence. I glanced out the window and saw the full moon, large and foreboding in the night sky, casting a ghostly light over the sea. Then I heard it, a distant sound growing louder. It was the train's whistle, long and mournful, echoing through the night. I looked through the telescope again and saw the train at the station, but it was different. It was new, alive with lights and movement. I realized then that the train and the lighthouse were connected, bound by some unseen force. The lighthouse wasn't just a beacon for ships. It was a beacon for the train, guiding it, calling it. I knew what I had to do. I had to return to the train to face whatever horrors lay within, to uncover the truth of the curse and find a way to break it. As I descended the lighthouse stairs, a sense of dread weighed heavily on me. The train's whistle sounded again, a haunting reminder of the journey I was about to undertake. I made my way back to the station, the moon casting eerie shadows along my path. The train was there, waiting, its engine hissing softly, as if beckoning me. I stepped onto the train, the doors closing behind me with a finality that sent shivers down my spine. The carriage was empty, or so it seemed. As the train started moving, the lights flickered, and I saw them, shadows, fleeting glimpses of people, or what used to be people. They were trapped, just like the woman in the journal. The train plunged into a tunnel, and everything went dark. I could hear whispers all around me, voices speaking in tongues I couldn't understand. The air grew cold, and I felt something brush against my skin, like cobwebs or fingers of the dead. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed, trapped in the darkness with the whispers and the unseen hands. My heart pounded in my chest, fear like I had never known gripping me. Then, the train emerged from the tunnel into the night, the moonlight streaming through the windows, the shadows vanished, and I could move again. But the relief was short-lived. Sitting across from me was a figure, shrouded in darkness. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light of the train carriage, I realized with a growing sense of unease that the seat was empty. The figure I had seen was just a trick of shadows and my frayed nerves, but the haunting image lingered in my mind, a woman with a pale face and hollow eyes, like the one described in the journal. The train pulled into the station, and I stepped off, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief mixed with confusion. The journey had been surreal, filled with fear and inexplicable events. Shaking off the unsettling feelings, I focused on the reason for my trip, the inheritance from a grandmother I never knew. Weeks passed as I settled into my new life. The inheritance included a massive Victorian house, a beautiful yet imposing structure filled with antiques and long, shadowy hallways. It felt like stepping into another era, a world removed from the modern hustle. One rainy afternoon, while exploring the attic, I found a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside was the journal I had seen in my nightmare journey on the train. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing pages filled with familiar handwriting. The entries detailed the same journey I had just experienced, the same eerie occurrences on the train, and the same feeling of being trapped in a nightmare. The last entry ended with the woman escaping the train. I sat back, the journal resting in my lap. The realization hit me like a wave. The woman from the journal was me. I had been living this cursed cycle without any memory of it, each escape only leading to another loop. Then, one night, as I lay in bed, a distant sound broke the silence of the night. At first, it was faint, barely noticeable, but slowly it grew louder. It was the sound of a train whistle, a sound that should have been impossible given the house's location. I rushed to the window, peering into the darkness. In the distance, a faint light moved through the night, growing brighter with each moment. My heart raced as the realization dawned on me. The train was coming, not for anyone, but for me. I watched in horror as the light approached, the sound of the whistle becoming deafening. The room around me started to blur, the edges of reality fading away, and then everything went black. When I awoke, I was back on the train, the familiar sound of its wheels on the tracks echoing in my ears. The cycle had begun again. Outside, the scenery passed in a blur, a nightmarish landscape that seemed both familiar and not. And as the train plunged into the darkness, a chilling thought crossed my mind. Was this my destiny, to be forever trapped in this loop, a ghost in my own life? The train whistle sounded again, a mournful echo that seemed to resonate with my soul. And with that sound, the realization set in. The journey was far from over.